The only reason Grandpa survived was because the neighbor's Yorkie barked loud enough to wake someone. By the time I got there, the yard was soaked in blood, 2 of his ribs were poking through his flannel, and a shaky HOA security officer was crying by the garden hose. "We thought it was drugs," he kept stammering, like that explained the shattered inhaler or the 23 broken bones. "Yeah, that's me, standing there with the badge and the crowbar. You're probably wondering how we got here." The summer it all began, I had just moved back into Grandpa's house after a string of bad luck and worse landlords left me couch surfing with half my life in storage. Willow Ridge was supposed to be my reset button. The town was quiet, the grass was green, and Grandpa was still kicking around in his overalls like he hadn't aged a day since I was 10. He'd wake up with the sun, shuffle out to the garden, and hum Johnny Cash while pulling weeds and scolding the squirrels for stealing his tomatoes. Everything had a rhythm, calm, grounded, old-school peace that I hadn't felt in years. But peace has a way of attracting chaos, and ours arrived wrapped in khaki polos and self-importance. See, that was the summer our HOA decided to launch something called the Community Patrol Program, which, on paper, was supposed to be a rotating neighborhood watch. In practice, it turned into a full-blown cosplay SWAT team. They wore matching vests, carried radios they didn't know how to use, and spent most of their time trying to catch teenagers vaping behind the rec center. Karen Whitfield, our HOA president and local menace, claimed it would reduce suspicious activity, which was HOA, speak for poor people and non-compliance. I laughed it off, Grandpa didn't. "Nothing good ever comes from folks playing cop," he said one morning, watering his collard greens. "I should have listened." I left that Thursday around noon to run errands, figuring Grandpa would be fine trimming hedges and swatting mosquitoes like he always did. He had his oxygen tank in the shed, 2 spare inhalers, and the same routine he'd followed for decades. But routine doesn't stand a chance against stupidity with a badge. That afternoon, 2 of the newly minted officers, Brady Keller and Mitch Roscoe, rolled up on our property in a borrowed golf cart. They weren't cops. Hell, they weren't even licensed security. Brady was Karen's nephew, a guy who failed out of the police academy after 1 semester and still wore mirrored aviators like he was DEA. Mitch was the guy who once got banned from Little League for starting a fistfight with a 12-year-old umpire. Real winners. Apparently, they spotted Grandpa using his inhaler on the front porch and decided that he was brandishing an unidentified substance. No joke. That's what the report said. Unidentified substance, like my 78-year-old grandfather was running a meth lab between the begonias. They confronted him, told him the inhaler had to be confiscated pending inspection. Grandpa, God bless him, didn't back down. "This here's my rescue inhaler, not a damn syringe," he told them. "You want it, you better bring a warrant." But these weren't the kind of boys who knew the law. They were the kind who made it up as they went. One pushed him. The other grabbed the inhaler from his hand. According to the neighbor's security footage, and oh yes, I got that later, Grandpa tried to grab it back. That's when Brady tackled him. Not a takedown, a tackle. Full speed, shoulder first, into a 78-year-old man with osteoporosis and a bad hip. Grandpa hit the bricks hard, and Mitch, in a stroke of genius, decided to help by sitting on his chest to restrain him. The man had asthma. He couldn't breathe. And they sat on his chest. Neighbors heard the scuffle, but they didn't know what was happening. It was the Yorkie that saved his life. Mrs. Lively's teacup dog started barking so loud she looked out the window and saw what she thought was 2 men attacking a homeless man. That's what she told 911. By the time paramedics arrived, Grandpa was unconscious, his ribs shattered, his hip dislocated, and his skin covered in bruises like ink stains on paper. One of his inhalers was crushed on the walkway. The other, according to police, was missing. I got the call while waiting in line at a hardware store. I don't remember driving to the hospital. I just remember walking into the ER, seeing Grandpa on the bed, his chest wrapped in gauze, his face purple with bruising, and thinking, this doesn't look like a misunderstanding. This looks like a hit. Karen showed up the next morning with a fruit basket and a weak smile. "I'm so sorry," she said, wearing a cardigan that probably cost more than my car. There's been a terrible mix-up. The officers thought he was a trespasser and maybe on drugs. That's when it clicked. She was already laying the groundwork, smearing him, protecting them. Drugs? I repeated. Lady, that was an inhaler. He's 78 and has copped. She didn't flinch. You know how these things can be misinterpreted in the moment. They feared for the safety of the neighborhood. He was watering his carrots, I said. Was the hose a weapon too? She blinked, fake sympathy melting into that tight little smirk she wore whenever someone stood up to her at HOA meetings. Look, this isn't about blame. It's about procedure. We're investigating internally. Internally, of course. The fox watching the hen house. I asked for the names of the officers. She refused. I asked for the body cam footage. She said there wasn't any. They're just volunteers, she said. They're doing their best to protect our community. I looked at Grandpa, lying there with wires taped to his chest and a machine beeping next to his broken body, and thought, then I guess I'll protect it myself. That night, I made 3 phone calls. One to the hospital administrator, one to my lawyer friend in Baton Rouge, and one to a guy I knew from my old job who owed me a favor. If they wanted to play cop, they were about to meet someone who actually knew how to investigate. Grandpa may have been the one lying in the ICU, but this was the moment I decided to take down the entire damn HOA. Starting with Karen, ending with Brady and Mitch in matching jumpsuits, orange ones, because you don't get to break 23 bones and call it a misunderstanding. You don't get to crush someone's chest and walk away with a slap on the wrist. Not in my house, not in this neighborhood, not while I'm still breathing. And unlike Grandpa, I didn't need an inhaler to catch mine. I just needed names, leverage, and time. And lucky for me, the HOA had already handed me all 3. The moment Grandpa was stable enough to breathe without a machine, I started hunting. The hospital let me sleep in a plastic chair beside him, but I didn't. I sat there with a notebook in my lap, and rage simmering under my skin like slow-burning coals. I needed answers, but more than that, I needed receipts. They didn't just hurt him. They came onto our land, laid hands on an old man who posed no threat, and tried to cover it up like it was a pothole repair gone wrong. So while Grandpa counted ceiling tiles and blinked against the fluorescent hell of the ICU, I was piecing together what happened, one painful breadcrumb at a time. My first stop was the HOA website, which looked like it hadn't been updated since dial-up internet was a thing. But buried under community initiatives and upcoming bake sales was a half-page blurb about the Community Patrol Program, complete with a blurry stock photo of a man in a vest handing a ticket to a teenager. No names, no rosters, just vague wording about volunteer community safety liaisons. I checked the page's metadata. It was created by someone with the username KWAdmin. KW, Karen Whitfield. That tracks. I ran her name through public business filings, social media registries, and even Reddit, because you'd be surprised what HOA Karens leave behind on the internet. Nothing concrete. But her nephew, Brady Keller, popped up fast. Local Facebook groups were littered with photos of him from 6 months ago, shaking hands with the mayor during Community Safety Week. One post even called him our very own enforcer. That same post had 17 comments, most of them sarcastic. One in particular stuck out. Didn't this guy get kicked out of the academy for pepper spraying his own partner during a training drill? I followed that comment trail until I landed on a public record request from the county training facility. Brady Keller, terminated from the academy after 4 months due to reckless conduct and failure to follow protocol. There it was, strike 1. Mitch Roscoe, his sidekick, was even worse. No official training, but 3 citations for impersonating a peace officer. 2 of them dropped because he claimed he was doing community service. He was also the proud founder of something called Liberty Shield, a defunct nonprofit that once tried to sell neighborhood watch memberships for $50 a year. The reviews were full of words like intimidating, armed, and refused to leave my porch. Strike 2. But the real gold came when I started asking around. Mrs. Lively's son, Derek, was a systems analyst, and he owed me a favor from a few years back when I helped him beat a bogus parking ticket. He was able to backdoor into the HOA's digital communication logs, the kind they didn't think anyone would bother looking at because they were hosted on a free Google Workspace account. no encryption, no password rotation, and worst of all, no brains behind the wheel. The logs showed a series of emails between Karen and the rest of the HOA board titled Security Equipment Orders, Urgent. In them, she discussed allocating over 7.0 of the Community Beautification Fund to purchase PPE for the patrol team. That included tactical vests, utility belts, body cams, only 2 never activated, and something called citizen-grade compliance tools, which I later learned meant stun batons and zip-tie handcuffs. They even bought fake but official-looking metal badges from a supplier that also sold novelty sheriff hats and engraved flasks. They called it soft deterrence. I called it cosplay fascism. By the time I hit page 17 of the email thread, I had enough to tie Karen to the funds, the gear, the program, and most importantly, the attack. But I wasn't done. I wanted the footage. Every HOA meeting was supposedly recorded for transparency, so I submitted a formal request under our local Civic Information Act. Karen ignored it. I sent it again, certified mail. Nothing. Then I showed up in person at the HOA office, a converted garage behind Karen's house, with a tripod and a handheld camcorder, and told Margaret, her assistant, that I'd be returning every day until the recordings were made available to the public. Margaret gave me the kind of look you give to someone who's just told you they like drinking gasoline for fun, but by the next morning, there was a USB drive in my mailbox labeled HOA Records Q2 Q3. That drive changed everything. In one video from 3 weeks earlier, Karen is on camera, sitting at the head of the table in a turquoise blazer and enough pearls to choke an oyster. She says the words, "We need to be proactive about deterrence, especially with problem houses. If the law won't do anything, we will." In another, Brady gives a presentation with a PowerPoint slide titled Engagement Protocol. He says, and I quote, "If someone refuses to comply, we escalate using appropriate force. Verbal, physical, then subdual." I could have vomited. These people weren't patrolling, they were hunting. That's when I made a plan. I printed everything: emails, invoices, training documents, quotes from the supplier that sold them the stun batons. I burned copies of the footage, and then I called a local news station. They didn't bite yet, but I had something better: a platform, a projector, and an open HOA board meeting next Thursday. They couldn't stop me from attending. And they sure as hell weren't ready for what I was about to show. Thursday came, the meeting was packed. Word had spread about what happened to Grandpa, and while most of the residents had kept quiet out of fear, they were curious. They wanted to know what kind of neighborhood they were really living in. Karen took her usual place at the table, flanked by Brady and 2 board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. I waited until the public comments section and raised my hand. "I'd like to share a few concerns about the Community Patrol Program." Karen tried to shut me down. "We're not discussing that today." "It's relevant," I said. "My grandfather is still in the hospital because of this program." The room went quiet. She folded her hands, fake smile plastered on, and nodded like she was doing me a favor. I walked up to the front, pulled out my laptop, and connected it to the projector. Then I pressed play. The clip began innocently enough: Brady and Mitch walking up our driveway, already wearing gloves, with body cams that weren't recording. Then came the shouting, "Put down the device. It's an inhaler." Grandpa yelled, "Drop the inhaler," Brady screamed back. Then the tackle, then Mitch piling on, then silence. The room was dead quiet. When the video ended, I turned to face them. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was an assault. A coordinated act of violence by 2 untrained men, sanctioned by this board, funded by your HOA fees. I turned to the audience. They used money meant for landscaping and streetlights to buy stun batons and fake badges. They told your neighbors to use force on people they don't like. And now my grandfather can't walk without a frame because of it. A man next to her whispered, "We need a lawyer." Karen tried to regain control, slamming her gavel like it was a magic wand that could make the truth disappear. "This meeting is adjourned." But it wasn't. Because the room didn't move. They stayed. They started asking questions. And I had answers. Not all of them, not yet. But I had enough to make the empire tremble. Enough to know this wasn't just a case of power-tripping neighbors. This was a coordinated abuse of authority, a slow-motion assault masked as community safety. And for once, people were finally seeing it for what it really was. The first crack had formed, and I was going to rip it open with both hands. It started with whispers, not loud ones, not the kind that echo off porch railings or drift over fence lines like barbecue smoke. These were quiet, cautious murmurs, passed between neighbors over trash can lids and sidewalk chalk, during mail runs and dog walks. Always followed by a glance over the shoulder to make sure Karen's curtain wasn't moving. After the footage went viral, first in our neighborhood, then on a few community Facebook pages, and eventually picked up by a local investigative blogger, the spell broke. People saw the HOA for what it had become, not a stewardship of property values, but a petty dictatorship propped up by fear and fluorescent paper fines. And once folks realized they weren't the only ones getting harassed, they started talking. Mrs. Bellinger, who'd been fined $600 last year for having non-regulation shade of blue on her mailbox, showed up on my porch with a folder full of every citation she'd received since 2019. Mr. Watkins, the retired fire chief 2 blocks down, told me Brady once threatened to detain his teenage grandson for riding a skateboard too fast near the clubhouse. Detain? With what authority? A laminated badge from Etsy? That's when I found out about the list. Karen's list. A spreadsheet titled Ongoing Compliance Concerns, attached to an email dated 6 weeks before Grandpa's attack. It had 15 names. My grandfather's was at the top. The offense? Refusal to address vegetation overgrowth. The note beside it read, Recommend secondary inspection with medical review. Questionable activity observed. See audit notes. Medical review. I dug into that phrase until I hit something I never expected to find in an HOA document. A wellness safety initiative launched under Karen's direction the month before the patrol program started. It was buried under the Community Outreach tab, written in vague, glossy language that basically gave the board the right to report and track residents whose medical equipment or conditions may pose risk to neighborhood safety. I printed it, highlighted it, burned copies. They were spying on people with oxygen tanks. They were flagging asthmatic grandpas for having the audacity to breathe near petunias. That's when I knew I needed a real attorney. Not a buddy with a degree from online law school. I reached out to a civil rights litigator I found through a friend at the ACLU, Sharon North, a woman whose resume read like the legal version of a war diary. When I showed her the footage, the emails, the audit policy, she didn't even blink. We're going to sue them into the next century, she said, flipping through my printouts like they were pages of a murder confession. She drafted a formal complaint within 48 hours, civil conspiracy to violate constitutional rights, abuse of authority, and unlawful impersonation of law enforcement. We filed it the next morning. Karen got served while she was pruning her hydrangeas. I watched from across the street. She didn't wave, but it wasn't just lawsuits and paperwork anymore. The neighborhood itself was shifting. A week after the board meeting, 2 longtime HOA officers resigned, officially for personal reasons, but I later heard it was because they didn't want to end up in court. That left 3 empty seats and 1 angry queen bee. And then something strange happened. A flyer showed up on every door. Black ink on neon green. Emergency election, whole board vote, special session. Normally, these elections pulled 10 people max. This time, everyone came. People who hadn't been to a meeting in years. People who'd been fined for wind chimes and shade trees and cracked sidewalks. They showed up and they brought folding chairs, lawn chairs, coolers, clipboards, and receipts. Sharon told me to keep a low profile, but the minute nominations opened, someone shouted my name, then someone else seconded it. Karen tried to intervene. He's suing the HOA, he can't run. But Sharon, who'd shown up in a power suit and aviators like the legal Terminator, calmly quoted the bylaws aloud. All homeowners in good standing may be nominated. No disqualifications pending resolution of active litigation. Good standing. That meant current on dues, and you better believe I'd paid them early that month just to be safe. The vote wasn't even close. Out of the 79 ballots cast, I got 62. Karen got 9. The rest were blank or scribbled, abolish the HOA with glitter pens, and just like that, I was on the board. Not as a spy, not as a saboteur, but as a representative. Of the people who were tired, of the people who were done being afraid. Karen was livid. She didn't even try to hide it. Her next email went out at midnight, CCing the board, the management company, the community Facebook group, and somehow my dentist. Subject line: concerning pattern of retaliation. She accused me of using emotional manipulation to sway voters, of misrepresenting the goals of the community patrol program, of conduct unbecoming of a board member. I responded by forwarding her own email chain approving the body armor. The next morning, she parked her SUV diagonally across my driveway and claimed it was a safety check. I had it towed. She retaliated by hiring a landscaper to measure my grass with a laser level. He accidentally flattened half her flower bed backing out. I sent him cookies. But I wasn't playing games anymore. I had Sharon drafting amendments to the bylaws. I had neighbors canvassing door to door, gathering signatures to repeal the patrol initiative. I had a copy of the budget, and it showed that Karen had funneled nearly $20,000 into discretionary safety operations over the past 6 months, none of which were disclosed in the meeting minutes. I started leaking, not to the press, not yet, but to the neighborhood group chats. A blurry photo of the receipt for uniform patches, a redacted line item for de-escalation training taught by a guy whose only credential was former bounty hunter. People ate it up. Every day, my inbox filled with more complaints, more photos, more stories. Karen was hemorrhaging credibility, and she knew it. So she did what she always did: she escalated. That week, 3 residents received code violation notices in the same envelope. All of them had publicly supported me. One of them was fined for obstructive porch decor. The decor? A potted cactus. Another was cited for excessive noise during non-approved hours. She'd been reading a book on her porch with headphones. I filed a motion to suspend all new fines pending independent review. The board passed it 2-1. Karen was the one. That night, someone broke into Sharon's rental car and stole the briefcase she'd left in the trunk. Nothing else was touched, just the documents. The next morning, a printed sheet was taped to my door. No note, just a screenshot of my own security cam footage, my face, distorted in motion blur, standing over Grandpa's hospital bed. The message was clear. We're watching. I filed a police report. They shrugged. Probably a prank. Sharon upgraded her alarm system. I slept with a baseball bat beside my bed, but I wasn't scared. Not really, not anymore, because fear only works when it's isolated, and this wasn't just my fight anymore. The community had flipped. We were a whisper away from a full-blown revolt. And Karen? She was running out of allies, out of time, and out of cards to play. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that I still had one more ace tucked up my sleeve. Something her nephew never deleted. Something Brady thought he could erase when he accidentally dropped his phone in the HOA office's shredder bin. Something we pulled from the cloud backup 2 days before he lawyered up and stopped showing his face in public. The soundbite was short, just 5 words shouted in a grainy body cam file. Drop the inhaler or die. The timestamp? 2 seconds before impact. I didn't play that clip yet. I was saving it, for court, for the press, or maybe for the night Karen finally pushed too far and thought she could win, because by then I wasn't just flipping a neighborhood. I was dismantling an empire, and I wasn't finished. Not yet. The courtroom looked like a Home Depot threw up inside a courthouse. Binders stacked like bricks, poster boards crammed with HOA bylaws, medical records taped to trifold science fair displays. And that one blown-up photo of Grandpa's blood-stained flannel, still folded from when I first handed it over to the prosecution. On the surface, it looked like a simple civil suit. Negligent security program, excessive force, personal injury, but anyone in the room with a pulse could feel what it really was: a reckoning. Karen sat at the defendant's table in her usual armor, cream-colored pantsuit, pearls like shark teeth, and an expression carved from stone. Her nephew Brady sat beside her in a suit that didn't fit, flanked by a public defender who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. Across the aisle, I sat behind the DA, a man named Corrigan, who wore cowboy boots under his slacks, and called my grandfather sir every time he mentioned him, even in closing statements. The trial opened with what Karen's attorney called a tragic misunderstanding rooted in community concerns. He claimed that my grandfather was often observed using an unknown inhaler device in a manner that alarmed neighborhood watch volunteers, that Brady feared he might be dealing drugs, and that the resulting confrontation was unfortunate but justified under a good faith belief of public danger. I almost laughed. Then I looked at Grandpa's empty wheelchair next to me, and I didn't. We opened with the footage, all of it. The audio-enhanced clip of Brady screaming, "Drop the inhaler or die," followed by the sound of a body hitting brick. Then the photo montage: fractured ribs, a shattered pelvis, lacerations, spinal bruising, all labeled with neat white arrows. We presented the forensic analysis of the inhaler fragments recovered from Brady's trunk, along with a pair of leather gloves, a roll of duct tape, and a clipboard that listed 19 names, including H. Whitaker, non-compliant vegetation, and C. Dominguez, mailbox offense. Karen's defense tried to block it. Speculative, they said. Unrelated. The judge, a silver-haired ex-Marine named Ford with a stare like an X-ray, waved it in. "Let's see where it leads," he said. It led straight into hell. When we subpoenaed Brady's phone records, we found voice memos, deleted but not destroyed. The state's tech team recovered 3. In the first, Karen's voice instructs Brady to check the perimeter of 471 Maple, see if that oxygen tank's still out front. If so, you know what to do. In the second, she says, "I don't care if he's old. Compliance is compliance." In the third, whispered and frantic, "If this goes sideways, you were acting on your own, understood?" It was enough to make the HOA's legal team file an emergency motion to sever their name from hers. They lost. Mid-trial, their lawyer quit, walked out during a recess, and never came back. Karen had to represent herself for one whole day, and I'll never forget watching her try to cross-examine a paramedic who testified that Grandpa's left lung collapsed in the ambulance. "Is it possible," she asked, "that he was already in poor health and this incident simply accelerated a pre-existing condition?" The medic blinked. "Ma'am," he said, "his ribs were pointing the wrong way." On day 5, Brady broke. After a lunch break and a whispered hallway conversation with the prosecutor, he came back with tears in his eyes and a signed plea deal in his pocket. He was led to the stand, hands shaking, and under oath he told the court, "Karen said if I didn't get people under control, she'd make sure my dues went up and my uncle got fired from the fire department. She said some people had to be taught a lesson. She called it corrective outreach." The room froze, then murmured, then erupted. Judge Ford banged his gavel hard enough to crack the wood. "One more outburst," he growled, "and I'll clear the room." Karen never looked up. Her skin had gone pale, almost gray. When it came time for the jury, they didn't even take an hour. 45 minutes. That's all it took. Guilty on all counts: conspiracy, impersonation, assault with intent, falsification of records, and obstruction. But that wasn't the end, not even close. Because after the conviction, after Karen was led from the courtroom in handcuffs, the state stepped in. See, once the civil stuff was wrapped, the Attorney General's office reviewed the evidence. All of it. They looked at the body cam footage, the hit list, the financial records showing HOA funds were used to purchase tactical gear labeled for suppression purposes. They found that Brady's stun baton had been modified. More voltage than legally allowed for civilian defense. And when the forensic psychologist submitted his evaluation of Karen, it included the line, "displays persistent and dangerous patterns of authoritarian control disguised as civic duty." That's when the charges changed. They reclassified the assault, no longer civil, no longer even criminal battery. It became aggravated assault with lethal intent and premeditation against a vulnerable individual. The maximum penalty in our state: life or death. We were back in court within 2 months, this time under much tighter security. The courtroom was packed. Local news, national cameras, protesters outside with signs that read, "Justice for Harold," and HOA equals domestic terror. When Karen entered, she looked different, thinner, haggard. Her pearls were gone, replaced by a standard-issue prison jumpsuit. Orange, just like I'd pictured. The prosecution didn't waste time. They played the audio clip one more time, Karen saying, "I don't care if he's old, compliance is compliance." Then they showed her emails, her nephew's testimony. They didn't even need to bring me up. But they did. Judge Ford invited me to speak before sentencing. I stood up slowly, hands shaking, and walked to the front of the courtroom. I didn't speak about the violence, I spoke about the quiet. About watching a man who once taught me to build a birdhouse learn how to walk again with a walker. About how he still flinches every time he hears raised voices. About how he couldn't breathe, and they took the one thing he needed to survive and called it suspicious. I ended with this. Karen Whitfield didn't break bones, she broke faith. Faith in community. In decency. In the idea that you can grow tomatoes and drink sweet tea on your porch without ending up in a trauma ward. So whatever you do today, Your Honor, please make sure no one ever trusts her with power again. The room was dead silent. Judge Ford took a long breath. Then he gavelled down. Due to the severity of the offenses and the clear pattern of targeted violence, the defendant is hereby sentenced to death by electrocution, the sentence to be carried out pending the standard appeals process. Gasps. Then stillness. I looked at Karen, expecting fury, but there was nothing. Just a hollow kind of silence in her eyes, like someone who finally realized the HOA bylaws don't hold up against the United States Constitution. 1 week later, Grandpa woke up. His first words weren't profound. They were grumpy. "I told you not to let those jackasses near my garden." I cried anyway. The doctor said he might never regain full mobility, but he didn't care. "Just point me to the hydrangeas," he said. "I'll crawl if I have to." Karen never showed up to her sentencing's final confirmation hearing. Rumor had it she faked chest pains to stall the process. But it didn't matter. The chair was still there, waiting, polished, and humming with quiet purpose. They even reserved her a seat in the observation gallery, for the community. For the neighbors she terrorized. For the people who now sit on their porches again, sip their tea, and breathe without fear. Grandpa keeps his inhaler on a lanyard now, just in case. And every time he uses it, he holds it up for a moment, like a toast. "To breathing," he says. "To freedom," I add. And sometimes, if the light hits just right, we can see the faint outline of Karen's house from our garden. Empty now, gated, condemned. The sign says unfit for living. We didn't put it there. But we agree.